Good evening. Welcome to the April 16th meeting of the City of Everett Planning Commission. Ayana, would you call the roll, please?
Chair Chatters,
Here.
Commissioner Zielinski,
Here.
Commissioner Yanusak,
Here.
Commissioner Ballard,
Here.
and Commissioner Sullivan.
Here.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to take the privilege of reading the land acknowledgement. We acknowledge the original inhabitants of this place, the Shtahobs people and their successors, the Tulalip tribes. Since time immemorial, they have hunted, fished, gathered on, and taken care of these lands and waters. We respect their sovereignty, their right to self-determination, and honor their sacred spiritual connection with the land and water. We will strive to be honest about our past mistakes and bring about a future that includes their people, stories, and voices to form a more just and equitable society. And so now we'll move on to approval of the meeting minutes. Were there any amendments needed for the meeting minutes?
Yeah, I was absent, but it looks like it says that I was here.
And I had the same amendment as Commissioner Yanusak should be moved to the absent column as well.
I think those are friendly amendments. We're all in agreement with those, commissioners? Unless someone saw the ghost of Commissioner Sullivan and Yanusak. Okay, any further amendments?
Move to approve as amended?
Second?
Thank you. I don't think we even need to do that
Oh,
because
great.
we only have a friendly amendment, which means by unanimous consent, without objection. So I guess I should ask if there are any objections to approving the minutes as amended. Okay, without objection, they're approved by unanimous consent. Okay. Now we'll move on to reports and comments. Commissioners, do you have any reports? No? Staff, will turn it over to you.
Okay, good evening. Good to see everybody again. Just a couple notes today. Becky is homesick right now, unfortunately, because I was going to make at least a tiny bit of a production out of this, but this is going to be Becky's, I think we mentioned it, or she mentioned it at the end of the last meeting, but this was to be Becky's last Planning Commission meeting. I think she is watching at home, so we can give a wave to the camera wherever that is. Hi, Becky. Becky is retiring, as we said last week, after quite a career. She's worked, I believe it's 9 years for the City of Everett, about a third of that in the planning department, and the other half or 2/3 in community development, our sibling department within community planning and economic development. Has made some really great contributions to the city, led the housing action plan work, has led the comprehensive plan update work to this date, has led innumerable more minor project code amendments and updates, and has really left a mark on the city. And I think the people of Everett owe Becky thanks, and I certainly do. She has been a pleasure to work with for the 3 years that I have worked alongside Becky in this capacity. Becky also has worked for a number of other cities throughout the county and the region, including Lake Stevens, Snohomish County, and Woodinville, and has left a mark on those jurisdictions too. So I just wanted to wish Becky well. She knows this, that we will miss her, and we appreciate her contributions to the work here. But we're also very excited for this next chapter. I hear there's some traveling, there's some grandkids, there's all kinds of good stuff that comes with retirement. So congratulations to Becky. At the next meeting, I suppose we'll meet the new long-range planning manager. We've made an offer and that's been accepted, and the new manager will start on this coming Monday. So we were lucky to be able to get a week of overlap so Becky can download as much and join that famous fire hose of information that comes at any new staff, particularly one in the midst of a major project like this comprehensive plan update. So we'll be gentle on the new on the new person, but yet we got to get up to speed quick, and we're watching that clock, watching that calendar with the periodic update. So a time of transitions. I don't know that we mentioned it at the last meeting. I think we did, but Kathy Davis, this has been telegraphed for a while, has now become Ayana. And Kathy is already on her first week of retirement, and I don't know that she is watching this this video. She's already on to bigger and better things. So congratulations to both Becky and Kathy, and thanks for their time. And we'll roll with the transitions and keep the work going as long as there's work to do.
Can I just mention to Becky, if you're watching, I have so appreciated your intellect, your expertise, your willingness to search out answers, and your service to the Everett community. Thank you. I'll miss you.
Well said.
And thank you to Kathy as well, and congratulations on both of your retirements.
Yeah. Yeah, I think Kathy actually did not want to be feted, I don't know how to say that word, celebrated as much, but wow, 37 years with the City of Everett, 35 of those with the planning department. It is really hard to imagine life without Kathy in the planning department, but she had luckily a good year and a half of overlap with Ayanna, so Ayanna is very capable, and first time with the minutes, by the way, so that's not bad in terms of corrections. And there will be lots of other kind of firsts. The two of you were here in spirit. We could feel your energy is why, I think. So the only other comment is kind of similar to last, where it's still working on Park District, still the same development agreement, and some of the fiscal impact issues that we're just dialing in. So I would expect that to the council. I think I said April, now I will say May. Nothing to do so far as I know with any of the pieces that came before this planning commission. The development agreement is complicated, and the lawyers told me that, but here we get to live it. I think that's it for staff comments.
Thank you. We now have an opportunity for public comment. Ayanna, do we have anyone online who wishes to comment?
No comments.
Okay, and we have no one in the gallery, so I think we are ready to move on to item 4A, the land capacity growth assumptions methodology.
Okay, this is really exciting. I think we've had bits and pieces of the comprehensive plan. I've been promising that we would turn back to it a little bit more full-time with some of the other kind of side projects out of the Planning Commission's work program. This aspect of the alternatives, the growth assumptions, and the land capacity analysis is pretty core to the comprehensive plan. It's going to define these maps, call them the brown maps, are going to define what subsequently becomes the zoning and the development regulations that really shape the large-scale development capacity and development potential that we'll see in different areas of the city. Of course, there's a ton of other work in the comprehensive plan. There's things like the policies and the capital facilities and the specifics of the development regulations and design and all of those things that we'll continue to go through that are supportive of this. But in terms of just the core, where is development going to happen? Where are we going to plan for development? How big? How many number of housing units? How many jobs? All of that is really fundamental, and a lot of the other details kind of grow out of that. So we last really worked on this last summer, both at the Planning Commission and the City Council endorsed a series of alternatives to study in the draft environmental impact statement. Staff has been working on refining those over the winter. I say winter broadly, including fall, and now we're into a little bit of spring here, but the darker months, the colder months. So here to update you on some of the work that we've done over the winter. And this land capacity analysis and growth assumptions work is really foundational to the environmental review and analysis. So we're already well underway with the draft environmental impact statement and have drafted I don't know, well over half to 2/3 of it, depending how you measure it. But it is a little bit difficult to judge the impacts of colors on a map sometimes with some of the more technical disciplines, of course. How much traffic will this make? Well, it's a little bit difficult to look at. So what this step does is translate the colors into numbers. How many housing units, how many buildings do we expect to build under a zoning regime or a land use regime as is defined in these alternatives? How many jobs do we expect? And then from that, we can add some detail to where we're already framing up some of the sections on things like stormwater, traffic and transportation, historic preservation and everything. So this is a step that we've been working on, and we've had little inklings of it over time. It's still rough, so I want to convey that. I was very eager to get this before you and out to the public to start reviewing it. We didn't want to get too far down the line, but so an early look at it also means that it's not perfect. There's already things that we're catching and noticing, and ask for your review along those lines too, whether it's at this meeting, or you can even send marked up copies of the maps or emails. And that goes for everyone who is watching on the air, and those that will circulate the memo and the factor tables too and everything. So Foundation for Environmental Review and Analysis, and then hoping to start laying the foundation to actually come to a plan. These are 3 alternatives. It's part of the required process under the State Environmental Policy Act that we study a range of reasonable alternatives to get a sense of what our room to maneuver is before choosing a preferred alternative or a path. And this is hopefully going to start laying some of that groundwork for how we are going to decide within the next year, or a little bit less than a year actually, what the actual plan is. As I've said all along, we're not expecting either one of these 3 alternatives to be the plan. In fact, 2 of the 3 alternatives, if you take them in their whole, have fatal flaws with them under state law. But the elements of them, I think I've described this as a menu, and there's the different plates or parts of the menu that are middle housing and low rise and high rise and higher rise and things like that. We expect some sort of a mix and match and an adjustment, and picking the best parts of each of the alternatives to craft a preferred alternative. So I think this conversation, have that in the back of your mind. What are you liking about different parts of the alternatives? Of course, you'll need the information from the draft environmental impact statement, and we're planning on taking kind of a road show in May and June to share both some of what you're going to see this evening, which is what we expect would happen if we adopted any one of these 3 alternatives, as well as some of the early results from the environmental impact statement in kind of like a bullet point format. You could expect, for instance, that, I won't even guess one, but some bullet point early results from the draft environmental impact statement. So we're expecting to bring some of that around to the city in May and June, and hoping that a lot of those conversations will begin to get us towards a path to a preferred alternative. Call it a preferred alternative because it's we have to study that under State Environmental Policy Act as well, and then you're free to modify it again before we get to final adoption. But at some point in this process, and we're actually toying with the idea of incorporating a preferred alternative into the DEIS. I think earlier we were imagining that we'd do the DEIS with these 3 alternatives, and then we'd look at the results and then undertake a process to get to a preferred alternative. I'm still not sure. It'll kind of depend how these conversations go in the coming weeks. You could save a document, you could save a little bit of time by getting right to a preferred alternative, but I definitely don't feel like we're there yet. So a lot will ride, I think, on how the next couple of weeks or 2 months play out.
Question, just so I understand procedurally, so staff in the process putting together these 3 alternatives, would the process be then that those would be presented along with the environmental impact statement at the planning commission meeting, and with the planning commission, I suppose, with a recommendation from staff, would the planning commission then kind of put something forward, or?
I think, yeah, it could be like that. To be honest, we don't have that fully defined. I know that asking any group of people to decide on something is difficult without leading with a recommendation, and that goes for the planning commission and the council too. So I think it's most efficient if staff, working with the whole city and the mayor's office, comes up with a kind of a suggestion. Easier to amend that than it is to come up with one.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was kind of getting at, is I don't know that we'd be able to be in a position through our meetings here to ever really be able to do that. I think it would be helpful. My thought would be putting together the 3 alternatives, and as you indicated, say, and here's what we've drawn to all this, and this is the fourth, what we propose to be the preferred alternative, and kind of working from that, I think would be process-wise,
Yeah, I agree.
the preferred, an easier, more productive way to do that.
The preferred alternative for a process. I think so too, and to develop that preferred alternative, now that is a good time for input, whether that's today or we'll surely turn back to this again in some form at the next meeting and we'll hear from the public, but start thinking about what parts of this you do like and what you might have as suggestions for don't go there, or this is definitely an important piece of this. And we'll talk a lot about the context and what kind of our basic requirements are, which we have already. We know we have to have middle housing, we know we have to meet our growth targets, and then there's other kind of locally grown city policies that are in our comprehensive plan now, and other multi-county and countywide planning policies, so.
And I just wanted to add one thing. I guess from the beginning, this process has been a little bit, it seemed to me a little bit strange to me that we have to put together 3 alternatives, and we already know that 2 of them, before we're even, as we're building them, aren't even legal. So in some ways, there seems like there's a bit of, I say redundancy or unnecessary work being done.
Yeah.
And it would seem to me that maybe, I understand there's value in the process of doing that, but I would think that as staff's doing that, putting that together, it would probably emerge to staff and be in the best position to identify what they think are the best of, and put together that kind of fourth. So I would feel that, I would feel very confident that at that point, having gone through all of that, whatever staff is putting forward, probably is something, a great place to start.
Yeah, great. Yeah, and I'm hoping that these alternatives have never resonated perfectly well with many folks, including staff, including the planning department. I've watched every other city and county in the region, I think, struggle a little bit with the same thing. We all have to have alternatives. This is not even a 3-dimensional problem. Alternatives are really designed for, I need to site a stadium, I need to site a light rail station. Where am I gonna put it? Over here or over here? And you weigh the 2 and you decide, it's gonna be this one. This is a multi-dimensional problem that how you group them into. So we're approaching it with opportunities to tell stories about more of this means more of that, more of this means more of that, and then we get an idea of the sensitivity of different parts of this, and that could inform that next step. But I agree on the process. I think that that's likely how we'll go. The timing is what I'm not quite so sure about, timing and sequence still.
One concern that I would have when presenting this to the public is that they may not fully be wrapping their minds around the fact that exactly what Commissioner Yanisek just said, that some of these are, we literally cannot do them under the law, and that we're drawing elements from them. So presenting the 3 alternatives, which are, some of them cannot even be done, can be confusing. So when presenting these options to the public, you mentioned you might present the 3 or maybe a suggested comprehensive alternative. And I would lean towards the suggested comprehensive alternative that removes the ambiguity around what is legal and what isn't legal for feedback from the public.
Sure. Yep.
Can I clarify? Sorry, go ahead.
Yep.
What are we referring to as illegal is that we're not complying with the new laws?
Middle housing.
On the middle housing and the ADU? Okay.
Yes.
And in minor defense of it, the middle housing, and this is a technicality that I'm not interested in exploiting, but the middle housing is not actually in effect for 6 months after the comp plan is done. So technically, we could do alternative 2 for a little bit, and then we would just have to come back. And I think there are other cities who are doing that. They're doing their periodic update, and then they're gonna do middle housing. To me, that was not efficient and not a wise use, or not a good use of the periodic update process. So just tiny little technicality.
And I guess I just want to, honestly, it would make sense to me, and for my preference, if we could just have staff dedicate their time and resources to just putting together that preferred alternative.
Yeah, right.
So,
Yep.
I guess that's kind
And
of what I'm getting
all
at.
the work that we'll show you this evening is equally useful to that process too, so.
Real quick, just to echo what we had talked about, the few times I have had feedback in our neighborhood meetings about the comprehensive update, there is often kind of a question of why do I care about this? And so I think obviously keeping that in mind for people who might not necessarily be able to draw the dotted line on how it's going to impact them in 10, 20, 30 years. So that's consistent feedback that I get.
Yep, great. Yep, we got some tools, slide 32, 33, 34. I think that'll help with some of that. Okay, I'll keep rolling here. So here are some of the updates over the winter, again, that staff have been working on. So some minor refinements to growth geography boundaries. If you would look back to June and July when we brought this before the Planning Commission and the council, I guess you might remember that things like Evergreen Way had a buffer around it of some distance, I can't remember what. We refined that to follow parcel boundaries. We have refined other geographies around the edges just to get them to the right place. So that has been an evolution. Metro Everett, back last summer, I think was wall-to-wall high-rise from edge to edge, which is kind of appropriate for a regional growth center, but ignores a lot of the detailed work that went on during Metro Everett, rethink zoning and all of that. I don't think we ever intended for it to be displayed like that. It was just, that was a geography, and the geography was high-rise. Most of our geographies have the same height throughout them, like the urban corridors and the frame are all high-rise or mid-rise or low-rise. We have since looked at wherever there are, around the edges inside Metro Everett, there are some lower heights right now that are more in the mid-rise and low-rise range, so we kind of corrected those. Not to say that we couldn't increase those if we wanted to, but corrected those to more of the wedding cake, higher in the middle, lower in the outside kind of a look.
On alternative one, that area south of Walter Hall is labeled as mid-rise, but on the other two alternatives, it's labeled as low-rise.
Okay.
Was that intentional?
I think low-rise is correct and mid-rise is not. We have spent most of our energy on alternatives 2 and 3. So, yep, that's good. I will circle that. Yep, and I'll explain a little bit about how that worked a couple slides down. Thank you. Okay, so updated Metro Everett designations, and we audited all of the housing typologies. I have to spend a moment on this term. I'm trying to get to a consistent term for all of these things. We have the growth geographies, which is metro core, metro frame, urban corridor frame connectors. And then we have these things: high-rise, mid-rise, low-rise. The word that kind of emerged was housing typologies or building typologies or growth typologies. I had to look up to make sure we're using that word right. Typology is a classification according to general type, such as a typology of Saxon cremation vessels, or a study of or analysis or classification based on types or categories. So typology, when I say that, just to explain it, because it sounds too fancy for its own good, which was not the intent. If anybody has a better term for it, it's kind of like category or categorization. Important to note that if you see mid-rise somewhere, that is the highest, tallest, most intense building that you would allow to develop. That does not mean that every building will be a mid-rise, and that does not mean that every building developed will be a mid-rise, and certainly doesn't mean that if you stand on the corner within that district, all you'll see is mid-rises. It'll continue to be characterized largely by existing development, especially early in the planning period, but that's the kind of the tallest development you could make.
Can you clarify your audited housing typologies to avoid reducing capacity? What do you mean by the avoid reducing capacity?
Yeah, there were a couple places where, let's say the growth geography said low rise, but our existing zoning was mid-rise. We didn't want to ever reduce someone's property's zoning with a generalized classification. And so that's what we did. We went through and made sure that we were never reducing something. Then we've begun our environmental analysis. We've got consultants on board and have done quite a bit of work on the transportation element. We had agency meetings with a lot of the state agencies, school districts, Port, Navy, all of those folks to gather some input early on in the process, and we'll continue to have those conversations with them. And then we developed this growth assumption land capacity analysis methodology and model that I'll get into now. Growth targets, so tempted to put that line chart on here. It will appear somewhere in this presentation surely, but you'll remember that our growth targets in summary are that Everett must plan for growth in 69,000 residents in population, 37,000 housing units, and 67,000 jobs. Furthermore, we have the housing by economic segments and special need category allocation. That's what the boxes are on the right side that are sized according to their proportion of that 37,000 housing units. About more than half should be in the above median income category because that's a segment that Everett needs to catch up on to be more of a level playing field countywide. And then on the bottom right, you get down to emergency housing and permanent supportive needs.
Sorry.
Yep.
Am I reading that? So that means, for example, emergency housing would need additional 2,383 units.
Yep.
And then we're
that's-
talking between 0 to 30% of AMI. Oh, okay, I see you got, I was gonna ask, where's the 40 to 80%?
Yeah, it's,
So you're saying, okay,
it's
I see the
zero,
note above.
just about, or it might even be negative 100.
So
We have-
does that mean that based on current capacity, we're meeting these projections under current capacity?
Current housing stock. We have a lot of 50 to 80% AMI, more than our regional share. And the idea is that going forward, other cities that don't have so much of that category should take steps to improve their capacity of it, and that Everett should focus on it.
So then, the 0 to 30% box there should be 0 to 50%, is that correct? Because your note says the 50 to 80% AMI is negligible. But your little graphic there doesn't have the 30 to,
Yeah, I'll have to take
there's a gap there, so it seems
You're
to me
right.
one of those numbers is wrong.
Yep, it is, yep. And I'll get that when my spreadsheet opens up. Another important note for the housing economic segments, these do not, if you build a unit at 100% AMI economic segment, it doesn't stay there forever. So this doesn't mean we can't build any 50 to 80% and still be policy consistent, because you would expect that some existing 60% AMI affordable unit is probably going to be demolished to build 100%. So you need to replace those units. And then also as units age, I would expect that they generally tend to move down that cost ladder.
And so I understand how you calculate that. If we were to provide for some additional provision for, say, 0 to 30%, but within those areas, you would also say you could build some emergency housing or permanent supportive housing in those areas as well. Do you basically get to double count that? Do they overlap, or do they have to be individual separate?
Separate, yep.
Okay, so when you're providing for the 0 to 30, for example, that you can't include in that the permanent supportive or the
Right.
lesser, right?
Yep.
So by providing for 120 AMI above, you don't get to necessarily include 100 to 120
All right, yep.
below.
Yep.
Okay.
So we need 6,000 units of deeply affordable, 0 to 30% AMI housing units, and I've got tables for what that equates to in rent. And we need 2,700 units of permanent supportive housing, and we need 2,300 beds of emergency shelter in 20 years.
Given what you said a few minutes ago, pointed out that just because it might say mid-rise, that's the highest you can go, doesn't mean you have to go to that
Yes,
height.
yep.
I guess maybe I'll wait and see, but how do you account for that, saying, okay, well, you can build 0 to 30, but if you choose to build, those other things, how do you exclude
Yeah, we
the lessers within the graders?
Right, yeah, we will not. We will plan for these targets. We need to show that it can be accommodated. Luckily, where a lot of our capacity is in multifamily buildings at that mid-rise, low through high rise. And those can accommodate just about any economic segment. So you can build a 7-story building pretty affordably and subsidized for low-income residents. That 7-story building could also work as a more luxury, depending on the finishes and the construction quality, the location and the views and all of that. I think with the Department of Commerce's methodology, what they're focusing a lot on is this applies to cities throughout the state and counties throughout the state. There's a lot of them that have almost no multifamily zoning. And so I think it's reasonable to say that you cannot single-family your way into a 0 to 30% household at any scale. So with the types of buildings that we're planning for, I think we have the flexibility for all of this. And of course, cities don't build the housing and don't have anywhere near the resources to subsidize and create these. It's gonna take the state, nonprofit, philanthropy, the city, all of the partners to actually build this. But what we're looking at is making sure that our regulations are in the right place to accommodate it, and that the rest of our planning is also in the right place. And then we'll have to let the whole housing universe do its best to deliver.
So is the reason why this would not, the total of these units identified as needed, why it wouldn't equal the number of units that is our target, around 37,000, is the reason for that because that total excludes emergency housing needs? Or why are the total number of units different from the needs assessment and our housing unit target?
They shouldn't be different.
I don't believe they
Did you
are.
add them up? No. And I got an answer to, let me see if I can do this without breaking anything.
Looks like they're slightly high. My guess is slightly higher than
It's
30.
a few thousand, it's a few thousand
To me,
units
it'd be pretty
higher.
close. I didn't do an actual, but I kind of rounded and added in my
Yeah,
head
I
and
think
decided
that
it was adding to
that there's a
37.
few $1,000 variance between the,
You know what I think it is the base year. So I'm looking at, and I've got numbers here that start at 2020 to 2024, and they have things like the 19,400 for above 120% AMI, and that column adds up to 38,500. So I think the 37,000 might be starting from 2024, and then the numbers on the right are starting at 2,000. So we'll double check that to get them exactly right. But I think that's the answer, is we've built 1,500 units in the first couple of years, and that was reflected on the left side, not the right side,
okay.
I think.
Okay, because if you look at the breakdown, the total number of units is 40,891, which of course could be reduced if we, like you said, we need fewer in what was it, 50 to 80, or might be 40 to 80% category, but that's still quite a difference between 37 and 40, nearly 41,000. So where is the discrepancy there?
Yep, so I think it's the 2020 to 2024, and then rounding would be the other part of it.
Okay,
So we've got all the right numbers.
Okay.
And we'll double check that for the next round.
okay, thank you.
Okay, so 37,000 housing units and 67,000 jobs is what we need to reach. I think we already more or less covered the approach to the alternatives at a high level, and then we'll dive into the specifics here in the coming slides. We'll go through the geographies. So these geographies were made kind of like by a standard definition that applied citywide. So urban corridors are Evergreen Way, Everett Mall Way, and 19th and Broadway north of downtown. Why did we pick those? Those are the major roadways that currently have the mixed urban zone. They also usually have frequent transit service, although that's not quite the case for like Everett Mall Way, for instance, and 19th may not quite fit that bill either, but Evergreen Way and Broadway have existing or planned BRT, and we'll get that transit service in the southeast side of the city as well. Definitely well supported by daily amenities and needs and services and all that sort of thing. Urban corridor frames is a couple of blocks outside of the urban corridors, basically walking distance to all of the above that are in the urban corridors. Metro Everett is an already defined geography, and then the Metro Everett core, I think we developed that since last summer as well. It used to be just Metro. Metro core is the area within Metro Everett that has 25-story zoning now. And then outside of that, kind of looks like Vermont on its side, I guess, shaped piece in the middle is lower, more like 10 or even lower. One thing that jumps out to me is that this does not capture the light rail station area or Everett station area. With all of these, we'll get to light rail station areas. We know that we're gonna do more work on the light rail station areas after this comp plan update is done. We could do it now, but for one, we don't know exactly where the stations are going to be for another 2 years, I think it is. And then there's some debate on whether there is time for planning or if the time is now or if the time is past. But either way, we're kind of holding that, so wherever you see the light rail station areas, you can, we're doing generalized work around it, but you can expect a more specific sub-area planning effort. But that's just something that kind of sticks out in my mind for the Metro core. And then the Metro frame is very small. There are only a few areas where there isn't a pretty obvious topographical or other barrier that really holds Metro Everett boundary in place, and those are the historic overlays that we've tried to avoid significantly increasing capacity in, or actually at all, except for middle housing, I believe. Then there's, of course, the industrial area, the water, and there's a big ravine system next to the hospital there on the west side. So and then south of Metro Everett is already planned for pretty significant growth, so it doesn't really need a framing, if you will. So then that leaves the area just north of Everett Avenue there on the northeast side of Metro Everett, just a small area that would receive the Metro frame treatment. Connector geography are smaller arterials, collector arterials, or secondary arterials, depending on your terminology, that maybe historically have played a role in growth. They're often anchored by neighborhood business nodes on either end of where we've drawn the boundaries. They connect, usually have better amenities and sidewalks and bike lanes, and just seem like they have a good opportunity to play a little bit of more of a role in accommodating growth. They are all right now just single family. And so you'll see in alternative 3, we have low rise for those corridors. And then the rest is single family or neighborhood residential, depending on the alternative. Single family in alternatives 1 and 2, and neighborhood residential in alternative 3. That's the beige area. And there are a few white areas. You'll see Casino Road, the area south of Walter Hall, the area around Forest Park, up north, there's a couple others. Some of those are parkland, and some of those are areas that are neither single family nor any one of the other ones. So they're low rise or mid rise zones today, but they don't overlap any one of those other geographies. So basically, in none of the alternatives are there changes made to those. I think south of Walter Hall is maybe UR3 zoning with maybe a 4-floor height limit, for instance. So that's neither single family nor a connector, a corridor, or any of that. So those are the geographies, and I think we already went through the updates in the first slide, but here it is all on one map.
Can I kind of go back in topic, but would there be any downside? I mean, you get the growth targets you set out, 37,000. Would there be any downside to using this as an opportunity to prepare and to plan, present an alternative that might provide for 60,000 capacity or something way higher? Would there be any downside to do that now? Does that, or?
Not necessarily, no. I think you'll see that we're working with something that's different than theoretical capacity. We're working with a plausible or hopefully likely scenario of how theoretical capacity would be used in the real world. And I think the capacity that we've found, the theoretical capacity of these maps is pretty vast. But we think it's unlikely to actually be used, all of that, in the 20 years. So I'll go over how we kind of connect those two.
And as I'm looking at this map, I'm seeing certain areas that have a number 4 or number 7. Is that the heights?
Yep, floors.
And I guess the reason I'm asking is I was looking at those and noticing, and it seems to me the difference, just geographically, between a 4-story and a 7-story, doesn't seem like a huge, if you're gonna put a 4-story in, it wouldn't seem to me to be that big a difference, impact-wise, to put it in a 7. And so it seems to me, why even bother with any 4s ever? Just anything that you would do 4, just bump it up to 7.
Could be.
And, there'd be a way to find capacity, and actually maybe even exceed capacity. So I guess that's kind of what I was just getting at conceptually is, yeah.
Yeah, as a way to provide abundant opportunities to create housing and placemaking and investment in the city, that's a good approach. On the balance side, I expect when we do hit the road in May and June, we're gonna hear a whole lot of like, well, if it's 4, it may as well be 1, and then you can stop bothering my street. That sort of a thing. So that'll be the balance. I mean, a 7-story building would be a little bit more in the way of traffic. It'd be a little bit more in the way of visual impact and that sort of thing.
Yeah, of
So-
course, but of course, we're only, but at a certain level, we're talking about theoretical too. No one has to build up to that, but just building in that capacity now, rather than doing it incrementally, just jump up there, and in some ways, it seems to me that's a way to kind of get that vision forward and start laying that groundwork earlier, because if we really are gonna hit these population targets, think big. We might as well be looking now to where we can put that, and why wait till the next time, 10 years from now, when we do that and bump it up 3 stories? Let's just get it done.
Right, yeah. I think there's aspects of that built into this, but there's certainly more we can do. And you're right, there will be another planning period, there will be another increment of growth, and we will keep on going as long as the growth spigot on Washington State and Central Puget Sound remains open, which by all accounts continues to be. 29 people a day, I think, into Snohomish County are either net born or net move into. Okay, so this busy slide puts it, kind of puts it all together. So on the left side are those typologies, high-rise tower to neighborhood residential, and then you can see where they map to in those geographies. So from the top, high-rise tower is in alternative 2 because that is more concentrated. The buildings get up to 40 floors. And in alternative 3, dispersed, they're a little bit lower at 25 floors. They both, the 40 and the 25, both apply to the same area, which is Metro Core. There are 79 buildable acres in play in that geography. So whatever we assume for a capacity will apply on 79 acres. High-rise, those are Metro Everett outside the core, and they are the urban corridors. 1,000 buildable acres. In alternative 2, 25 floors. In alternative 3, 15 floors. If you remember, alternative 2 was like boosting more concentrated. Mid-rise. oh, yeah.
I'm not understanding, why is the number of buildable acres less than acres?
Buildable acres is, thank you, net of critical areas and their buffers. So if you have a 1-acre parcel and there's a stream running down the corner of it and a 60-foot buffer that makes it, you cannot build on that 1/4 of an acre, you have 3/4 of a buildable acre.
Do you have to include unbuildable areas within your, I guess, wouldn't it be better to just exclude those areas from
Yeah,
the
they are
plan to begin
functionally
with?
excluded, yeah, you can't build on them, we're not assuming growth. It would be inaccurate to assume growth on it because you can't, at the end of the day, actually build on it. So when you look on a map like this and you see brown high-rise, you're seeing 1,246 acres, but 240 of them are off limits for development.
Would that include like things like setbacks and everything too?
No, nope. Setbacks are part of the buildable acreage. Mid-rise. Mid-rise is 7 floors in both alternatives, but where mid-rise happens is different. In alternative 2, it is metro frame, urban corridor frame, and then those existing mid-rise zones like Casino Road. In alternative 3, it is not the metro frame or the urban corridor frame, which is a lot of acreage. It is only the existing mid-rise zones. So you see the 1,415 acres of mid-rise in alternative 2 and only 572 buildable acres in alternative 3. And you will see this reflected in a significant difference in the capacity and the expected growth under the different alternatives. Low rise, 4 floors, that's where what's not mid-rise in alternative 3 went. Urban corridor frame, also connectors only play a role in alternative 3, and then the existing low-rise zones. And then neighborhood residential, detached housing and accessory dwelling units versus middle housing. Note the 2,700 buildable acres are, as it looks on the map, our single-family and neighborhood residential zone is vast.
York, one other question.
Yep.
These are the maximums.
Yep.
Is it such a thing to zone for minimum requirements?
Yep, we have it in Metro Everett and the UR4 zone, I think. We have a minimum density, I cannot say this with a straight, we have a minimum density of 3, and then we also have a minimum height of 3 floors. And the reason I chuckle about the density is it's 3 what of what. Normally that would be a fraction of some sort, and we were left to figure out that presumably it means a minimum of 3 units, but if you have 100 acres, you can put 3 units on there, but.
I guess it would just strike me as something I'd almost want to cry if someone was in downtown.
Yep.
Gonna just go to three stories.
Yeah,
and
right.
All of
So
that
we should look at
wasted
those.
space, and I feel that way kind of in some of these other areas where there's so much opportunity, and to someone to go in to build a 1 or 2 story when they could be going up to 7
Yep.
or 9, just
Yep.
heartbreaking.
Yep, it's a tough one, and you'll remember some of these discussions with accessory dwelling units. There's a
That-
big tension
yes.
between some housing now and more housing later. But yeah, we'll definitely need to look at that.
Yeah,
it's
that
a
was
tough-
exactly the conversation I was thinking about, the UR4, I think with regard to the accessory dwelling units and the issue of not allowing the accessory dwelling units in that particular zoning because we're trying to anticipate more density, but there are folks who would potentially like to build an accessory dwelling unit now, but that might delay the densification of those particular spaces. Commissioner Sullivan, did you have a question?
Well, I was just kind of thinking, so is there an assumption that the private market is going to drive some of this anyways, right? Like if it's not, well, it's an assumption, right? We're assuming that they're going to want to maximize the usage of the space. So, I mean, are you having to use that logic when you're looking at this, or do we just kind of forget that?
Yeah, in general, the profit motive would push someone to the highest and best use, and that's what the assessor values property at. So you actually lose money because you're being assessed at the highest and best use for the land value at least, while only collecting the rents or whatever it is on your less than ideal use.
Sorry to interrupt you.
yeah.
Is that why you don't see as many minimum requirements? Because you almost, I don't want to say you don't need them, but that it's not as impactful, right? The incentive is already there because of the market.
It should be. Now,
Okay.
you need to develop the market. A developer needs to feel confident that they'll be able to rent all of the units, and high-rise gets expensive, and so you can get a guaranteed revenue out of a fast food joint there, and
I see.
we have those conversations all the time where I tell someone who's gonna build a short plat and 3 houses, you know, next year you might be able to build 4-story apartment building on there, and they say, I feel comfortable that I'm gonna get a profit with the 3 houses and I'll leave it there.
Okay.
So that's exactly why I don't think it's appropriate to assume the full theoretical capacity out of this, and we'll take a look at what we think as a first step might actually happen.
And I guess, yeah, that just kind of worries me, is because
Totally.
I think, we want to go higher, but the market will say, yeah, maybe we'd love to go higher, but once you go ahead, you've got construction costs, you've got all these other things, and maybe sometimes, the builder just doesn't have that experience, that capacity. They, like you said, you can guarantee that I can go to 4, I know, I'm comfortable with that. I could go to 9, but that's gonna, I don't have the financing for
dicey.
that. So so there's other things, even maybe someone else could go to 9, but they can't, and
And then we're pushing them out, so then
and
the
it
other
just seems,
person's
yeah,
coming in.
but yeah, and so I understand why. It just does seem like we have such a need that,
Right.
I guess, it seems to me there should be a way for people to partner with other, I mean, something we could do as a city to say, you know what, if you're gonna come in, you're gonna propose 4, let's connect you with these people, put together a joint project, something, get it up to 9, get it up to 15, provide for that housing, and I know that's not the way it's been done. No, people aren't doing it that way, but I'm just thinking it should. And
Okay, so
someone
that,
listening out there, let's find a way to do that.
so that makes me wonder, other cities are having the same dilemma.
Yep.
I'm super curious, like, what are they doing with the minimum, and I'm not asking for an answer right now, but
Right, yeah.
I am kind of curious about
Minimum
context.
densities is one, and then the incentives, there's things like multifamily tax exemption, and you could graduate the incentives to incentivize
I see.
larger buildings. But I think it's gonna be difficult to really require the perfect and not the good. So I think one of the tools also is if we were to only plan to the bare capacity, then you run the risk of the capacity not being there, because you know that not everybody is gonna build to that capacity. So to Commissioner Yanisak's point of having some buffer around it, that enables the market to operate freely, and you will eventually get there. Now, there are places like a light rail station or Metro Everett where you want, maybe you just know the economic stars are gonna align in 10 years, so don't waste that development now and prohibit it. But it's a big city, and there are a lot of places where maybe even if it is zoned for 10 stories, that it makes sense. We gotta have a fast food joint somewhere, so. Could be in the ground floor of a building. There's an idea. Yep. Okay, this is another version of the same table, I think, but you can see how the 3 alternatives map to the different typologies and geographies. Alternatives, typologies, geographies, I think, until somebody gets me a better term for it. I guess the only thing I'll mention here, the rest has already been said, is that the special areas, we've got a couple master plan developments, riverfront, waterfront, and I was gonna say Baker Heights Park District, although that is TBD on what number to write in there. So those were just assuming build out of the master plan.
We did, well, quite a few meetings ago, we kind of talked about special purpose or zoning around the Park District.
Yeah.
Now that we've passed it and it's gone, I mean, it's kind of how it affects the other neighbors in the community. I mean, is it fair to give them a similar benefit or a higher, so they have some options with their properties? Just kind of be consistent with that.
Yeah, well, yeah, so.
As
let's
well
look-
as planning for transportation and everything else to be focused on that area.
Right, yeah, so look at, this is exactly, I was excited to get to this point. Now, you've had these maps, but they're a little bit more refined now, and I think, yeah, no, those are right. So now you can really see how the Park District fits into its surroundings, and this next year would be the time to make some changes as we see what the outcome winds up being with the Park District, and then start planning for what might make sense around it. Is that what you were getting at?
Yeah, I guess how would that recommendation be? I mean, we kind of talked about, I'd like to see that. I mean, I guess what
Okay.
would be the next step of proposing to have something more consistent with what's happening there in the Park District now. Because now it's kind of sitting in these single-family residences, which are fine if they want to keep it there, but I feel like as an option for them to maybe do something different there, now would be the time along with
Yeah.
that Park District.
Yeah, noted, and we will explore that. We're planning in May and June to try to hit as many of the neighborhood associations as we can. And then we'll kind of make maps zoomed into those areas and have the conversations with the folks in the neighborhood. And of course, the public is going to have a significant role in shaping these too.
And is this updated? I know that when Becky did the presentation showing, showing it's all online, are these now online to use that same software to be
story
able to
map?
roll over? And so these are updated with that?
I think so. I think so. If they're not, it will be the highest priority. Yeah. Erica, our GIS analyst, has been doing phenomenal work to get this packet ready and everything. So that would, if it hasn't been done, that's why, and it will be done soon.
One more, on your bottom circle here, it's dashed. Was that a special reason why it was dashed, not solid?
Yeah, it is a provisional station, but I think the dash is because it's outside the city limits.
It's not dashed on the part of the circle, but it's in the city.
Okay. Okay, yeah, so it is the city limits. Well, we should probably do a session at some point to look at the southern border of the city for consistency with the county's planning, because they're doing a lot of similar work, and there's an interface for us to keep in mind. From what I've seen, we're quite consistent here. Okay, so this is the developable land, the buildable, gross buildable acres by geography, and you can really see high-rise core, no difference, high-rise, no difference, mid-rise, a lot more mid-rise on the left, less mid-rise on the right, where the balance is low-rise. Why there's less neighborhood residential than single-family, there's a reason for it, but it escapes me right now. Okay, got to spend a moment on buildable lands analysis, which is the state law required land capacity analysis that the county and its cities conduct.
Before I go on,
Yeah,
I
yeah.
noticed the 28-foot height limits. When would that be on the table to have a conversation about that being different than 28? Or
think-
even being 28, but having it calculated differently?
Right. Yep. I think we'll have dedicated agenda items on middle housing coming up pretty soon. This kind of treats the neighborhood residential not much different than the rest of them, but it is very different. It's such a huge area of the city, and it is both has consistency with state law and everything. So we'll have a dedicated session or whole meeting on middle housing here pretty soon.
Excellent, because that little 28 is so restrictive. That would be the saddest part of all of this to me, is if we do not adjust that to allow for the reasonable building of a 3-story residential structure, and 28 just won't cut it.
Yeah. Yep, heard. Okay, so buildable lands, this is the legal, state law required land capacity analysis was completed. That's growth target was simplifying like 3 more sentences of jargon, but determine whether there's sufficient suitable land to accommodate the growth target. So remember those numbers, and we will have to do our land capacity analysis, which needs to be consistent with the buildable lands methodology. But there's one important distinction, is that we're looking forward and buildable lands looked backwards to what the actual density would be. That's that second bullet point, the observed development history. If we have seen the average developments in the UR4 zone were 94 units an acre, then we assume that going forward, the UR4 zone will produce 94 units an acre. With our land capacity as part of the comprehensive plan, of course, we're changing those numbers, and so you can't really look to the past. We're developing our own assumption of what that density will be going forward. And this was last updated in 2021 after some revisions at the state legislature's level to the methodology and everything. Here's a couple of maps showing what buildable lands, kind of how the methodology, that there's a reminder with all these memos where you see blue text, that's a link, the buildable lands report, and there's associated methodology. You could spend all day long learning how it goes, but I'll give a very quick review of it. On the left side, every parcel in the city and the county, actually, the urban growth area, is assigned a status. Purple is church, darker purple is school, green is constant, meaning under the zoning that was in place in 2020, we would not expect there to be capacity for any more units on that. There's a house, it's maybe 6,000 square foot minimum lot size, it's a 6,000 square foot minimum, or 6,000 square foot lot, there's a house on it, nothing you can do there, it's constant. Most of the single family area, of course, is constant because of that. Orange is partially used and blue is redevelopable. Redevelopable means based on, I think, the value of the structure or where it is on the lot, you would probably see the structure torn down and replaced by new development. Partially used, you would likely keep what's there and maybe build on the parking lot or something. Vacant, not worth spending too much time on because there's almost none in the city. And then special and pending is red is pending, and then special is usually city-owned or something like that. Pending is there were permits in place, and by now those have been probably completed, and we've updated that pending list. On the right side, you see what the results, so those land capacity, you take every redevelopable parcel, you take the 94 units an acre in the UR4 zone, let's say one of those blue ones is UR4, you take the gross buildable area of the parcel times 94 units an acre, and that is your housing capacity on that parcel. On the right side, you see where there is capacity in those shades of green. Not much in the single family zones unless it's a double lot or something bigger. Lots of capacity on Evergreen Way because of high zoning. And this is what we're updating right now.
York, I have to ask, how are these made? Is someone physically going out to each of these properties and making a visual assessment?
Assessor data is the first lens. Then there is review, not in person, but on maps. I think it was David Stahlheim or Dave Tyler, one of the Daves that was, I think, Becky's predecessor, worked with the county, and each city collaborates, and they go through and they say, no, that's actually, you can't develop that, it's a utility property, so we switch that to special. So there's some hand changing.
So someone going through parcel by parcel and doing that? It's not, there's software or?
The whole UGA, I don't think we didn't have the robots that we
Wow.
do now in 2020. So maybe next time will be some machine learning or something, but yeah, ton of effort went into it. And for Everett, it was an interesting era because we had just finished rethink zoning and we had just changed all of our zones. We added the height map, which is not really addressed in this buildable lands report and everything. They did the best that they could, and it did have human oversight. But it was an odd time for Everett. There's all kinds of gnarly tables like this in the buildable lands report. This is what shows, I know you can't read it, but this, I hate, never mind. The 94 units an acre is the highlighted one on the very bottom. This shows observed developments, how many acres they used, how many dwelling units came out of it, and what the assumption for dwelling unit density and employment density on that side is. And so that's what fed into that model. And I knew I could not go a whole meeting without showing this chart. So the end result of the buildable land study is that kind of semi-famous capacity line that we are just short of for a 2035 target and quite short of for a 2044 target, which is why we're having to make some changes to our zoning as part of this periodic update.
And when we're looking at that map that I was just commenting about, that's as of now under current zoning.
Correct, yes. Yep.
Okay. So all of that, if you were to bump that up to neighborhood residential, boom, all of a sudden everything changes.
Yep, absolutely, yep. We did the ADU ordinance, which would have added some capacity, so we were actually in what's called a reasonable measures framework because this analysis showed we didn't have enough capacity for a 2035 target, so you have to take reasonable measures likely to improve consistency with the target or something like that. We have reported that the ADU ordinance and the Housing Development Incentives Program, which would seek to make better use of the zoning that we have, together were enough to cover that, it's like 1,500 unit shortfall. So now we're mainly focused on getting to that 2044 target. Okay, the model. So this is our best effort at recreating something like buildable lands. There are some reasons that we couldn't just redo exactly what buildable lands did, and some ways that we can improve on it and make it a little bit more tailored to Everett. So first, just like buildable lands, we started with the parcels in Everett. And actually, it's economic units. An economic unit includes multiple parcels under common ownership or part of a common development. So there are more parcels than economic units. So from now on, when I say parcels, I mean economic units. And if there are 7 parcels that are underneath a building, those are treated as one. 24,736 parcels in Everett. 1,051 of them were undevelopable under the assessor codes that are in the memo. We hand found ones that were maybe completely critical areas, Malsby Swamp, utility owned, things like that. And then we also removed schools, churches, and specials. I know churches actually are a great source of housing supply, and you could definitely quibble with whether that should be undevelopable in this model or not. In reality, it's kind of developable, kind of not, depends on the case. We just followed buildable lands with this. That leaves 18,597 developable parcels. The next layer is looking at the best indicator, and it's the one that they use in buildable lands, of a property's likelihood to redevelop, which is the improvement to land value ratio. You might have a piece of land that is worth $250,000 and it has nothing on it. That's a 0 improvement to land value ratio. You might have that same $250,000 parcel with a $500,000 improvement value. It's got a very nice house with very nice things on it. That wouldn't seem unlikely to develop because you would be deleting that $500,000 in value before you even started your development, which is difficult enough to pencil. We did a study, and a 0.5 ILR ratio winds up on the conservative side in that only 1/3 of the parcels. So we took the more vacant, less valuable relative to the land third of the parcels and said those are the ones that are going to be likely to develop. That's the map with a bunch of yellow parcels in your packet. Is every one of those 6,401 more developable parcels in the city. And you can see some kind of patterns here. It does not follow where it's not like the more expensive areas show up and the least expensive don't, kind of a thing, because the land value is the equalizer there. If you're more expensive area, you'll need more of an improvement value to be less developable. So 6,401 parcels, you see where they are scattered throughout the city. Those are the ones that are in the model. Everything else is held constant. So whatever is there now, we assume will be there in 20 years. It will not develop. Surely, in reality, some of these will develop and some of the more developable will not develop. This is the best statistical correlation that researchers have found and use in the buildable lands consistent methodology.
I'm sorry, so I understand. So the properties over like the West Muckletill Boulevard, so these view properties where the land's got greater value, you're leaving them in and considering them more developable?
Correct, yep. So if it's a highly valued building, then it's also a highly valued piece of land. So this is exactly where we need peer review on this. One thing that jumps out to me, we've looked pretty carefully over the whole city, one thing that jumps out to me is that there's not many parcels in Metro Everett. I would guess that if you're building a 40-story building, you're more likely to tear down something that's relatively valuable.
I actually have a question about that, sorry. If there's a 4-story building that is then gonna be rezoned to be 7 stories, that doesn't inherently mean they're going to tear it down. Does it, you can just add on to a building, right? Like, I
It would be
mean,
difficult.
okay, so it's
Yeah.
like an unlikely situation.
yeah.
Okay,
So usually if there's a 4-story building there, that's gonna be fairly valuable relative to the land value, and it's pretty unlikely that it'll wind up in this model.
okay.
So York, just to make sure I'm processing this correctly. So the yellow parcels are the ones where the land value is relatively high compared to the value of the improvements, the existing improvements. And so therefore, they are more likely to be developed over the next 20 years. Okay,
Yep,
thank you.
that's exactly.
And so the idea is that you're just looking at those because that's where the opportunity lies for meeting these growth targets and for future development.
Yep. You would be authorized, one would be authorized to build on any parcel that is in the mid-rise designation. We would expect that in the first 20 years, if you're a developer hunting for an opportunity, and I'm going to share this with as many developers that I could find and try to test those assumptions, that you're going to drift towards the more vacant or less improvements to tear down. Now, again, downtown, that doesn't quite ring right. Maybe there's a different threshold for the higher intensity zones.
Yeah, it seems like we're just talking, it seems it brings, for downtown, and then as you point out, these bluff properties along Mukilteo Boulevard, I guess I have a hard time thinking those are gonna be anything other than maybe you could add on to a house but
Yeah.
it just doesn't seem to me, even if there is opportunity there, it's not different opportunity. It's, you're gonna take an existing house, single-family residence, and turn it into a larger single-family residence. So I don't know if that.
Well, it depends on the alternative, because in alternative 3, that house on maybe a 10,000 square foot lot can now be a triplex. Now, does a high-value triplex seem like a good development move on a view property? Maybe.
Yeah, I don't know, I guess it just intuitively just seems a little bit, something about that seems a little bit off.
Sure, yeah. So, yeah, this is, if you can think about it, chew on it, we'll get through the rest of this.
I mean,
and-
but the weird thing is the methodology, the idea behind it to me seems sound. Yeah, you want to look at those properties, but for some reason, when you start doing it and see what the result of that methodology is, the results seem incongruent with what you maybe would expect.
Yep.
Well, it leads, if this is true, then if we go back downtown, it leads me to believe that there's nobody that's gonna wanna develop downtown, right? There's nothing, based on your methodology, and you're more developable, less developable, we're saying our downtown isn't very developable.
Less developable. Right, yeah, so that's why it doesn't, that has come up as problematic to me too.
But if we're getting skewed
So
results.
then what is the way to fix downtown? Is
Yeah.
it a dollar value then, rather than a improvement to land value ratio? So is it, if you're building a 40-story building, you will tear down anything that's worth less than $1 million, regardless of what the land is worth? Or, I mean, this definitely gets every vacant parcel and every parking lot and every espresso shack on a
Yeah.
dirt lot. Those are definitely gonna be first. At what point do you tear down, I'm not gonna point out anybody's property, but you can imagine one that's kind of, that's a real building, it's not a vacant something, but a real building. At what point does that get torn down for a 40-story building?
I'm sure you don't have this data in front of you, but I'd just be curious, like, looking at the old YMCA property in downtown, of if that was included on our previous buildable lands report, just because that I'm sure there's plenty of properties like that that might have, I'm guessing it would have been included as a special,
Maybe, yeah, maybe.
just because of the use of it. But now it's not the YMCA.
Right, yeah, I mean, this is probabilities, and we'll get into the next set of probabilities next. There is, if we have to put, if we have to try to pick one future to study, then we gotta do something. But it's absolutely, there is uncertainty, both directions here. There are parcels where, no, nobody's gonna develop that because of some reason. Although, you know, it's really hard to put like fully functioning big box stores on the list, because you can't imagine that Costco will ever close. I wouldn't have imagined that Walmart would have ever closed until last year. So some of it kind of defies your initial expectations. 20 years is a long time. 20 years is also not that long of a time for things to change dramatically. So let's go through the next couple slides on the approach, and then we'll see what other kind of information and data might help us evaluate this. Building types. Okay, we haven't gotten into building types yet. This probably should have gone after that, but we are building up to 3 types of buildings in each. Will get randomly assigned to each of these model parcels in each of the geographies. Then we also have these bonuses. High-rise parcels over 2 acres. Most of these development intensities assume that you build property line to property line. That makes a lot of sense in a high-rise parcel if it's like a 10,000 square foot parcel. If it's the Walmart property, you're probably not gonna build it wall to wall. So we put a limit on the dwelling units per acre. This will make a little bit more sense in the next slides, which is why this should be after those slides. Mid-rise parcels that are very small, same thing. You have kind of a, I don't know, it's a diseconomy of scale or something, where if it's a very small parcel, it's very difficult to build any sort of height. So we capped the density there. Quarter mile to major transit stop, because you would need reduced parking. You could have reduced parking, 10% density bonus. If you're outside of the combined sewer area where you need to treat stormwater, you lose 10% because you need to save some space for stormwater management. But if you're in the combined sewer area, I think it just goes into that combined storm sewer. And then neighborhood residential parcels adjacent to an alley, usually much more efficient type of development because you can take access off the alley and you don't need a driveway. So 10% density bonus there. We have, on the left side, we have up to 3 types per typology, plus a constant factor that even of the 6,400 we would not expect to build. These are representative building types, not exhaustive. And as we've said a couple times, we do not always build to the maximum height. And a reminder of how these alternatives shape up with the typologies. I thought I moved this. Let's come back to that one. Nope, this is buildable acres by typology, just showing again that switch between mid-rise and low-rise. Okay, the busy slides. This is the core of the model. On the left, top left, you see the gross buildable acres by typology. Right now we're talking about high-rise tower, which is pretty small area. It's only the core of downtown. In the 2 alternatives, we have, this is why this is why our economic development director's eyes rolled back when I was trying to explain this a couple weeks ago. Okay, deep breath. In alternative 2 of the 6,400 parcels, the ones that are high-rise tower, half of them will develop into a 7-story 5/2 building. Then the next one on the bottom is 40-floor max residential, and then there's a 40-floor 50/50 residential commercial. So those 3 building types get placed randomly on all the parcels that are in the model. And it's a little bit of a different distribution on alternative 3, which caps out at 25 floors, so you don't have the 40 floors. You'll see that most of the parcels don't build to the full capacity. Is this a reasonable estimate of what the market would do? The end results of this model on those parcels is that in alternative 2, you get 43 parcels developed to a total of 4,500 dwelling units. In alternative 3, you get 58 parcels developed for a total of 3,600 dwelling units.
Could we really get away with doing something alternative to and planning for 40 stories? Because, I mean, that seems so unrealistic.
Yeah.
25 maybe, but 40 just seems so unrealistic. Would that really even be something we could do in a plan?
My philosophy coming into this, I don't know if I would call that a philosophy, my thinking on that is that it is better to allow it in case it is possible than it is to have, let's say, somebody comes with an investment trust and Everett, we've demonstrated that downtown Everett is where it's at. 10 years down the line, light rail is around the corner, the waterfront's looking great, streets are shiny, everything is going good. Somebody says, I'm ready, I want to build a 40-story building. We say, hold on, I got to go to the council, give me 9 months. And then they say, okay, never mind, I'm going to a different city. So I think there's reason to allow more than you expect, as long as that would be welcomed if it came. And I think in the metro core, that's the right place for as tall of a building as the city could potentially support.
Yeah, and I'm not saying, I guess I was remembering you said that the plan still has to be something that can be supported and.
Right, yep.
And so that's where I was just getting
Yep.
at that point. Is that something that would pass that kind of
I
test?
think so. I mean, there's broad support for major development downtown. I think the biggest hurdle there is that it seems unlikely today. Eventually, I think there's 40-story buildings sprouting like weeds in downtown Seattle and Belltown, and there are 25 and 30-story buildings in outlying neighborhoods and Bellevue, and I reason to believe that in the next 10 years, and there's differences in construction technologies and CLT and modular and things like that that could come around that would make that possible. Now, would you get, so the assumption would be that 4,500 units would be built in this geography with those 3 building types.
I think about the 40-story thing. It seems, if you look at Everett today and you're only thinking of Everett in terms of today, that seems like a stretch. But if you're thinking about what Everett will be ready for very, very soon, it really is not a stretch. And I guess I think of it more in terms of what you brought up, Commissioner Yanisek, which is thinking about for the future. We know what our planning needs are for the next 20-year horizon, but beyond that, there's going to be more needs, assuming that we continue to have strong growth in this region. So I guess it seems kind of hard to wrap your mind around with the current conditions, but that's very much future thinking, I think.
I want to call attention also in your packets, so this is what this table is. This is on pages, 10 and 11 of the packet. So we're on high core now. You see alternatives 2 and 3. Next column is the number of floors allowed in each alternative. Next column, constant, is that a quarter of the parcels that meet this improvement to land value ratio test would be expected to remain constant, so no change. And then you've got the different rates. 15% would be 40 floor max 50/50. 15% would be 40 floor max residential. The description is what kind of modeled that building off of. In this case, it's 815 Pine, which is one of those pictures on the bottom there. And then the key metrics are the green ones, the floor to area ratio and the dwelling unit density. And that's what actually is then creates that number of alternative 2 would result in 4,500 units in that geography.
York, in that same vein, is there any reason why you have to have do you have to have a number? Could you just say you can build as high as you can mechanically and
Totally
you can
fit.
get.
Yep,
Do we have to have a limit?
we don't, yeah, and I don't, yeah, if it's 40, what's the point of even that? I think Federal Way and Linwood have unlimited zoning in their city center cores, so.
I mean, I don't know if they, at some level, you might have to for planning purposes, but for actually in the code,
Right.
I,
If you can
Why-
finance it, if you can pass Tony Lee, the building officials, review under the building code, it seems like in this area, I think that could be supported. Okay, high-rise, alternative 2, 25 floors, alternative 3, 15 floors. This is the arterials and a little bit of the Metro Everett, so Broadway, Evergreen Way, Everett Mall Way, and 19th. Here, we've got a third of them are 7-story surface parking, which is modeled on 4 corners. That's 87 units an acre. And then 12-story and then a larger constant factor. This winds up producing about 14,000 units under each of the alternatives. You can see you lose about 1,000 units by capping it at 15 floors versus 25 floors.
Is Four Corners, is it 100% surface parking?
No,
I thought
there,
there was some, yeah.
it is the first floor or 2 of each building is also structured parking. The idea being that of your lot, you're not using all of the space. Yeah. So mid-rise, same on both alternatives, a third 4-story surface parking, a third 7-story max, that's modeled on the Nimbus top right. 4-story surface parking is modeled on, I don't remember what now, a woody walk-up, the colloquial term for the stairs in a interior parking system apartment complex. So because there's so much more land on mid-rise in alternative 2 than 3, you get so much more production out of this. 20,500 units in alternative 2 and only 3,000 units in alternative 3. Then the low rise is the just pre-existing, currently existing low-rise zones on the left side in alternative 2 and alternative 3. This is the corridor frames and the connectors. So you remember that was up in the 20,000s when it was mid-rise. Now it's 8,500 in alternative 3 for low-rise. And that is about half townhouses, a little sliver of 3-story apartments, and then half of it is constant. 3-story apartment is 66 units an acre, and townhouse is 44 units an acre. And last one, for single family and neighborhood residential, for alternative 2, we assume constant for everything. I think really we'll take the buildable lands capacity because that does capture, there are some double lots that have room for a little bit of growth, but for the most part in this model, we assume no growth there. And in alternative 3, so for the 6,400 parcels, lots of which are in the neighborhood residential, 6,000 dwelling units. I think 4,000 of those are I think 4,000 units were, hold on, I gotta find this number, I gotta get this right. This includes units that were on the ground now, so sorry, hold on a quick second. neighborhood residential, 6,006. There are 3,800 units on those properties now. With the other geographies, some units were demolished for redevelopment, but it was not as consequential as this one. So equals that minus that. 2163 would be the net new units produced out of neighborhood residential if that proportion were developed. 2,163 units sounds very small in the context of all these numbers that we've put out, especially for such a large area. But then on the other hand, that's 100 units a year, 10 units a month, 3 triplexes a month that are permitted and built. From that direction, it sounds like a busy planning department and a busy permitting department. I think this was roughly consistent. I'm watching other jurisdictions and how they do some of this. Tacoma released a home in Tacoma capacity analysis for their middle housing work. I think they assumed that 7.5% of the parcels would develop over the planning period into 4 units on those parcels. I think this was roughly consistent with that rate. Difficult to tell. We tried to predict with accessory dwelling units what allowing a second one and some of the other changes would actually produce, and it's probably about time to check in with that because it's been a full year, so time for the first round of permits. It definitely has picked up, and I think it was roughly consistent with what we thought.
So you may be getting to this, but between these 3 alternatives as they're kind of constituted right now, does each of these in their own way get us to those target numbers from the beginning of the presentation? Or are there some of these who are, as they're constituted now, would fall short anyway?
Yep, I think that's the next slide. So this is the comparison of the 2 alternatives. The answer, I won't make you wait. And I didn't want to dwell on the results because I think there are enough imperfections in the model that let's try to get the inputs right before dwelling on the outputs. But alternative 2 wound up with 6,000 more units than the target, and alternative 3 wound up with 8,000 short of the target. And I think a lot of that is because with alternative 2, not only the taller buildings, but the mid-rise is such a large zone, that urban corridor frame. So this chart, left is alternative 2 and right is alternative 3. Gray is buildable lands capacity in these geographies, and then orange is the modeled housing units. So the difference between gray and brown theoretically is the capacity that we have increased here. High-rise metro core, you can also see where the blue arrows are showing what the difference is between the 2 alternatives. So you see all the alternatives create new capacity just about everywhere. High rise, you get that increment more in alternative 2 than 3 because it's 40 stories instead of 25 stories. Sorry, high rise core. High rise, because the left side is 25 stories, the right side is 15 stories. You see that's what 10 fewer stories might get you, is less on the right side. The big difference is the mid-rise and the low-rise. That mid-rise really dominates and really creates a ton of capacity. Now imagine and go drive down Evergreen Way or better yet, take the Swift or 19th or something. Now 2 blocks, the back of those parcels is now single-family zoning. This is a dramatic change to a lot of blocks. North Everett from Oaks to McDougal, I'm sure I got those right. Single family R2 zoning might be a quiet street. Mid-rise is going to be a dramatic change for those blocks, probably the most dramatic out of all of this. Low-rise, 4 stories to, single family to 4 stories, you'd probably see that expressed in small apartment buildings on 1 or 2 lots, and it would probably fit in But whether someone actually takes advantage of it, you're gonna have to buy 6 houses to get the parcel size to actually build something. South Everett, larger parcels, a little bit more opportunities there, but then you also don't have the alleys, and there's a lot more wetlands and things like that. But that's a dramatic change.
And
maybe
you said
low,
that
yeah.
even with that, that just gets us 6,000 more than the target?
Yep, alternative 2, yep. So this is where you can mix and match a little bit. If you were to take alternative 2 and, well, maybe you don't want the mid-rise in the frame, but you do, we are gonna have the neighborhood residential. Does that get us there? Do we need a little bit of the 40 floors downtown, but we'll leave the rest of alternative 2 behind? We like the really intense stuff in Metro, but not the mid-rise on the frames. Do we like the connectors, but otherwise alternative 2 is the right way to go? That kind of a thing, I think, is our next exercise.
So I'm trying to square quite a bit.
Yes.
'cause I'm on this map.
Yes,
I'm yellow.
got it. Oh, good.
And so is my neighbor.
Yeah.
So it's really trying to bring these together. And I become, I'm
You don't
either
have to sell.
4 or I'm 7. So, lots of things just put together. So, okay, so in my neighborhood, which is single-family homes, your map has a handful of these as yellow, and the other map, the one with most of the green or whatever, the Snohomish County one, there's some similarities, but there's clearly some differences.
Yeah.
But these are occupied lots. But, so I'm trying to bring that in. How does an occupied lot turn yellow? Is it like for example, my personal lot, it's larger. Is that kind of something that's gonna increase the likelihood regardless of what's on it currently?
Yes, a larger lot would have a higher land value that would need a correspondingly high, if the house, I'm sure it's a wonderful house, is worth less than half of what, and this is the county assessor's assessment of the improved value. So if you go to your tax bill, you'll see
Yeah.
improvement value and land value. And if the land value is twice or more of what the improvement value is, that says that
Noted.
a developer would tend to go knock on your door before your neighbor, where maybe they have a smaller lot, same house, but less land available, that
Okay.
kind of a pattern.
That's great, because on my neighborhood meeting next week, when I'm explaining this to people, I need to be
Yeah.
able to tell them why. Okay, so that's a good point. And when we look at the alternatives and the height, because there's definitely a big difference between 7 and 4, as we've been talking about. Just because we pick a height, then you just reminded me of the lot size. So how do I put together the likelihood of these lots becoming 4 or 7? Am I just using your yellow dots because those are most likely to be redeveloped based on our alternatives? Because
And let's see, I think-
it would be crazy to look at Silver Lake and then have 7 stories that far off.
Yeah.
Constant, obviously, that was just like, that'd be insane. But sprinkled in is also kind of crazy because you'll have 7 stories next to single family that are tight. I mean, that's obviously the entire conversation we're trying to have, but
So I think, and
I'm
I'm
trying
not
to
sure
connect these
exactly
dots.
where you're looking, is it?
You don't know where I live off the
is
top of
it-
your head?
Which is probably a good thing.
Off 116th
116.
by Silver Lake, so
Is
just,
it mid-rise in both zones, in
It's-
both alternatives?
it's 100% mid-rise, yeah,
In
because
both
it goes all the way to
alternatives.
city limits.
Okay, so if you've got a yellow parcel in that mid-rise, then we're saying there's a 30 chance
Okay.
that in 20 years, nothing will happen, or it might be a 7-story, or it might be a 4-story.
Okay,
Now, you're probably not gonna take a single lot and make a 7-story building with it.
Probably not.
That would more likely be expressed either by, you and your neighbors on either side can put together a buildable lot, or that 7 stories really means mid-rise, 7-story max, 300 units an acre. Do you know how many acres you have?
I'm a quarter of an acre,
Quarter of an acre. So
but my neighbor has a much larger lot. So I'm assuming theirs is gonna fall more in that larger category.
So that would turn up 75 units if it hit the 7-story max. Can you imagine 75 units on your lot?
No, I have a 900
can't
square
either.
foot home.
That is why, and this is helpful to go through an example, that is why mid-rise parcels under a quarter of an acre, and maybe that threshold should be set somewhere else, were max at 90 units an acre.
Sure.
So I said that normally it would go to 300 units an acre, which would be 75 units, and that's not really possible on that lot. Now you can't aggregate it and everything, but 90 divided by 4. 22 units is very possible. Maybe not where you're at and not
Sure.
likely, and if you have a
But
homeowners
it's a
association
big
that says
difference.
don't do it, you can't do it, but
Okay.
that
So
is the reason for that.
So with that, they could build, you could build a 7-unit building, just one would have to be larger units. Because you can only get
Yeah.
22 dwelling units, so they'd have to be larger, but the bulk of the building under either scenario could be the same 7-story structure.
It would be, yeah,
Yeah,
but
like
the
one.
reason why we wanted to limit it for smaller parcels is that you're just taking up more space with walls and things, and there's just not room for the corridors and everything that you could have on a larger parcel. We have, now, it's hard to imagine small
I know.
parcels.
I'm not really thinking it will necessarily happen if it is. But when my neighbors ask me this question, why is my house yellow? Well, you have a big lot. I want to build a lot of units on it.
Okay, so for what is potentially possible, here's a pre-app that we had last year, just north of Metro Everett in a single, well, not a single family zone. 7-story building on a 6,000 square foot lot, totaling 21 units. So 21 units on a 6,000 square foot lot, and you've got 25,000, no, a quarter acre is 10,000. So I would, 30 seems like the practical maximum, but then if you join with your neighbors, then it's a little bit, it's not linear.
And that kind of, my last little question is just more general. So you also happen to have our driveway, like our easement, because there's 4 homes. So from the city's perspective, you're like, oh, here's this plot of land, but I believe the county actually owns it. Or it's like some weird, I had to look into this. So
Stormwater, maybe?
it's just like it's just our drive, like a shared driveway. But it fell into the category that it could be developed. Somebody's like, yes, that's just large enough. I want to put 2 townhouses there. How does that going to impact the neighbors? Because now, is that like in eminent domain where what was once a driveway is now a unit? So then does my driveway then become part of my neighbor's land? It's kind of, right, because if it,
They probably couldn't. So the easement
Okay,
would
so that
be
would-
a joint contract among the owners of the easement or those who have an interest in it that says that your neighbor can't put
Right.
something that blocks you and you can't do it, vice versa. So that is a reason that you, either that or covenants would be a reason that it's not likely to develop. So I would put your lot in the, probably the bucket that stays constant, most
Okay.
likely.
there's a lot of like those weird little
Yeah, all over.
in our entire neighborhood. Last one, I promise, and we could stop talking about my house. Silver Lake neighborhood includes significant amount of the county. And so when our meetings have county people, and you said that our maps tend to kind of, they're working well together. Where am I pointing somebody to find out that information?
The county has their own whole process just like this, and they've got a great website
Okay.
with all of, yeah, so they probably didn't make many changes to, if it's single-family R7200 zoning, it probably is similar. I think most of the changes they made are along the arterials and corridors for transit, TOD kind of stuff.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's possible that as soon as you hit the city limits, which happens to be a road, on the other side of the road can drop back down quite a bit. Okay,
Could be, yep.
that's fine. I'll just let, if anybody asks, now I know.
Commissioner Zelinski?
Yara, could you just explain how, if at all, annexation fits into the picture of looking forward and looking at growth targets and capacity and so on?
Yep, absolutely. We're not really assuming annexation doesn't much play a role in this. We're focusing within the city only. As we annex, growth target comes with it. Excuse me, the annexation area is in a light rail communities designation, which is a designation that received a pretty significant growth target like Everett. So it would probably be more or less a wash. We would bring in land with the same general characteristics and same general target as Everett. So we joint plan with the county for that. We're coordinating with them. We should probably do more in terms of really charting that path, but it's just beyond our capacity right now, and I could see putting a little bit more effort into annexation after the comp plan, unless, of course, something comes up out of the council or something.
So we could potentially take some of this, some of the low-rise opportunities on these connectors that we identified under Alternative 3 and the neighborhood residential middle housing, and combine it with some of the more ambitious development of like the Metro Core and some of the more concentrated development along those like Evergreen Way and Broadway and some of those major transit corridors. And we could potentially have some really strong future buildable numbers, it looks like.
Yep. And you can see with this exercise with Commissioner Sullivan, how many reasons there are that things won't develop. And that's why it seems odd to leave, all that white, and then you've already taken 2/3 of the parcels off. So there are things like covenants that say you may not add another unit to this entire development, and things like that that we're trying to account for. Got just a couple more, nothing more complicated. Wanted to point out another, and please, this is not a final product. I would love to hear whatever errors or things to test or correct. Here's one of them. Metro Everett has industrial zones. We removed industrial zones because we're focusing on housing for this part of the exercise. That's a little bit of a conundrum. Metro Everett, obviously, place for housing. That's adjacent to Everett Station, but it's industrial zoning currently, but it's a special kind of industrial zone that does allow for housing development. Most of the rest of the industrial area is off limits. So that's something that doesn't seem right. You won't see any growth assigned to the light industrial zones in Metro. We probably want to think more about that. So just want to throw that on a slide. And then some products that we're working on to help visualize what this will actually mean. So we already have maps that turn the results of this into numbers on every parcel, and we've kind of scanned and things look roughly right. So wanted to get this inputs out before we start doing outputs, but we can share those maps with you and the public here pretty soon. And then there's pictures and images worth more words and numbers. From right to left, 40 floors in Metro Everett on a 20,000 square foot lot on the right and a 6,000 square foot lot on the left. Probably not going to get a 40-story building on that lot. 25 floors, and then 7 floors. Another thing we have to keep in mind is once you get outside of Metro Everett, you see those steps. Those apply citywide. You need to pull back the building 5 feet at the 4th floor and then another 5 feet at the 8th floor. Outside of Metro Everett, then you also have to pull back the building off the sides by 5 feet for every foot above, or every 5 feet above 35 floors. So you get this little pyramid design. Architects hate it. They hate it because it makes for, they want to build boxes, and there may be reasons that boxes are less attractive, but they are very efficient. Similar floor plates on every floor. Every one of those steps creates water intrusion issues and costs. we're constantly processing modification requests to this requirement. We're gonna have to take a hard look at it. I think there's reasons why it can improve light and air and all of that and at the ground level, but it is causing so many problems at the development. Have not had one single building say, yes, I'm excited about doing that. That also reduces the developable capacity, and these FAR numbers should account for that. So these were just some SketchUp models that hopefully I can show all of these building types in the same scale so you can easily compare them.
Would modifying that in the codes provide capacity in and of itself?
Yep.
Of any measurable worth?
Yep, a little bit, yeah.
It would also incentivize people to come here and build in Everett. It's probably the biggest feedback on why people don't do more development in this
Okay,
community.
you've heard that too? Yeah, okay.
That seems like low-hanging fruit.
Right, right. And there's some, it doesn't have to be expressed. It looks kind of silly, all the stair steps. It could be a podium with a skinnier, central piece and then a nice patio around outside or a deck kind of a thing, but. We have this GIS program that if we can wrestle it into the right shape, will show the actual buildings that, and this is the reason we went down this path of 3 building types and a constant. If you remember, at the county's buildable lands analysis just said everything that's yellow is 94 units an acre, period, with no variation. We wanted to show what it actually might look like at a street level, and we have this tool to visualize it where it'll take all the setbacks and the height limits and these other regulations and build a boxy building in it. So here's one of the, as we were getting it set up and training, so we'll try to have these kind of products coming out. This was the buildable lands map that we showed earlier, and here's an example of the new with numbers, so you see the colors is probably all that stands out at this level. But you can see how it kind of compares and where there's some differences. And then there's, of course, more numbers that are hard to see here on the single-family zones. Okay, now we can start the second half of this meeting, which is employment. I'm joking. With employment is so uncertain right now. We last had a regional economic forecast that gave sector breakdowns, and I talked about this over a year ago, before gig work, before remote work, before differences in manufacturing, actually to the positive side. PSRC develops a land use model that feeds into all of the planning projects you can imagine. Light rail, ridership analysis, WashDOT, highway project analysis. It's the machinery that predicts the outcome and the transportation and all of that. They have it for housing too, but I think we can do better than that model's inputs for housing. But employment, I didn't even want to touch it. So I'm proposing that we just use the PSRC model because we need to know where employment is going to go because of the travel modeling and other reasons. I would say their guess is as good as any. This is what that looks like. The blue color circle is how many jobs are there now in these different zones, and then purple is what is projected in 2044. This is designed to be consistent with our targets, so it assumes that we do create those 67,000 jobs. Your guess is as good as mine as to how that actually occurs, but in the past, we've been pretty consistent with those employment growth numbers region-wide, so there is reason to expect that that could happen. Most of it is in Metro Everett, I think is the short version, with another healthy dose in South Everett in the industrial area and along the corridors. And these are the growth by sectors, and we should, everettwa.gov/2044. You can go for all of your, all of these materials will be available on there, and that's where we can continue the conversation. So that, in a nutshell, is where we're at with land capacity. Once we get this kind of dialed in, this is what we'll send to the stormwater folks to say, what if we had 10,000 more people in X watershed? And we'll send it to PUD, and we'll say, do you have the power, electricity, to serve these units in these places? And that's why we need to get to actual numbers in this whole painful exercise. So if you have any feedback, we've already given me plenty, I appreciate it. Hopefully, I assumed it was very difficult to follow this memo cold, but now that you've got a little bit of the orientation, as you notice things, please send them along.
And I have a question back on one of the slides you showed, you were talking about the combined sewer
Yeah.
storm.
Yep.
And you were separating it out on what people would need to do storm
Yeah.
provisions on that. My understanding is that's an old system that's going away, so.
I don't
That's not
know,
a long-
actually.
Yeah, the idea is to make that not be here, so I just, in the planning process going forward, I don't know how you would consider that.
Yep, this was one that I put on there and have not yet cleared it with the stormwater folks, the experts. I actually have a meeting with them this week. So that's one of the topics that I was gonna bring up. There's also retrofits of existing and to what extent that does take space, and there's vaults versus surface and everything, so. But I thought that you did not have to build ponds in North Everett, in short, but did in South Everett, but we'll check that.
Additional questions, commissioners? You did a great job of explaining that. I was kind of lost on a few of the charts when I was reading it on my own, and they're pretty clear now that you went through that explanation,
Great.
so thank you.
Thank you.
We have, I'm sorry, are you done,
I'm done.
York?
Yep,
Okay.
yep.
We have a final opportunity for public comment. Ayanna, do we have anyone?
No comments?
Excellent, then we are adjourned. Thank you.